Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Erin Gauntlet. I'm Deputy Director General, Local Government, Racing, Gaming and Liquor here at the Department of Local Government Industry Regulation and Safety. Before we kick off, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting. I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk Noongar people on land who I'm meeting, and I know that we have people attending from various lands around this beautiful state. And I would like to acknowledge the continuous connection that Aboriginal people have had to the land, culture and seas. And I'd also particularly like to welcome any Aboriginal people who are online and joining us today, and Aboriginal people in our department. Well, thank you. Today we're very lucky, and it's really great at this time of year when it's so busy to have everyone attending. And I'm really pleased to be able to say that we've also got the Minister for Local Government, the Honourable Hannah Beasley, MLA, as well as Mr Tony Brown, the inaugural Local Government Inspector, Ethan Redshaw from our team here in the department, who heads up our legislative reform program, the large legislative reform program that we've got in train, as well as we've got Michael Brooks, who's Principal Policy Officer, Strategy and Transformation, and he's going to be facilitating the Q&A session today. So this webinar marks a significant milestone in the reform process, featuring addresses from both the Minister and the Local Government Inspector, and that's a first as far as I'm aware in our webinar series. So I think it's a fantastic way to end the year and to sort of herald the new way of working, and that will be fully operational as of the 1st of January. So today, the department and staff are going to outline 3 key regulations that were formally made yesterday ahead of this important legislative changes commencing on the 1st of January. So we had the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee regulations, the Local Government Inspector regulations and the Inspector Consequential regulations that were all passed yesterday, just in the nick of time for the webinar. Someone did comment earlier, oh, lucky we just got them through a day ahead of the webinar. But this making of these regulations marks the implementation phase of these reforms. So as I think a lot of people would be aware, we've been in a period of time when we've been getting ready for implementation, getting ready, setting things up, establishing the office of the Local Government Inspector, bringing Tony on into that role, and we've been really fortunate to have a period of time where we could make sure that everything is set up and ready to go as of the 1st of January. And the passing of these regulations is a really important part of that process. A quick note about housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded. It will be available on the LGS website in early 2026. And after the session, we'll email you a copy of the presentation slides. And if you have any questions, please use the team's Q&A function at any time, and we'll address those during the Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to send through any questions or comments you have, and we'll be collecting those up and going through those at the end. But at this point, it's my pleasure to introduce the Minister for Local Government, the Honourable Hannah Beasley, MLA. Thanks, Minister.
Thank you so much, Erin, much appreciated. And kaya to everyone. Nagala Kadish Noongar Mort Kayan Karak Nijabuja. I acknowledge the Noongar people as the original custodians of this land. And I join with Erin, and thank you very much for your fulsome acknowledgement of country. But I too pay my respects to Whadjuk Noongar elders past and present, as well as all senior knowledge holders, and recognise the strength and resilience of First Nations people and the richness of their diverse cultures. As I've said, I'm joining you today from Whadjuk Noongar country, but I also pay my respects to elders past and present, and recognise the collective contribution of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across Western Australia, and from where you may be joining us today as well. It is absolutely wonderful to address you all today to acknowledge a really significant milestone on the Cook Government's local government reform journey. In just 2 weeks' time, Western Australia's first Local Government Inspector, Mr Tony Brown, who's along in the webinar today as well, he will assume his powers as the new regulator of the local government sector. I'd like to acknowledge incoming Inspector Brown, who joins us today and will be speaking with you shortly. Inspector Brown, supported by a team of skilled investigators, compliance specialists and complaint handlers, is key to delivering improved accountability, transparency and decision-making in local government. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the staff at the Department of Local Government, Industry Regulation and Safety, who have played a key part in delivering this important reform. A lot of work has gone into setting up the Office of the Inspector. I also acknowledge the collaboration that shapes and strengthens the implementation of our local government reforms, in particular, the collaboration and insights of WALGA and LG Pro. Unfortunately, it has been clear this year that the government's decision to pursue this reform was a very justified and some might say prescient one. We have seen fraud, misconduct and poor governance plague some local governments. This unacceptable behaviour tarnishes the whole local government sector. The implementation of the Local Government Inspector will help restore the community's confidence in local government. The Inspector has a wide range of tools available to him to enable early intervention and resolution of issues before they become wider problems. Importantly, the Inspector also has important powers that enable him to facilitate sanctioning of complaints, enforce compliance with the Act, issue infringements, prosecute offences and, if needed, conduct inquiries. And I will, if required, take decisive action based on the Inspector's advice against those who are letting down the communities they should be serving. On a brighter note, as we approach the end of another busy year, it's timely to reflect on the milestones in local government reform that have been achieved. The past 2 years have seen significant focus on legislative reform to support a transparent, robust and innovative local government sector. At the end of last year, our second major piece of reform legislation passed Parliament. Since then, significant work has been undertaken to implement these changes through updated guidance materials, regulations and establishing the new Local Government Inspector's Office for January next year. This year, many of you have also taken the time to comment on the draft regulation for CEO KPIs, public registers and communications agreements. Your submissions on this have been very welcome and will be used to inform the path forward for these reforms, and I thank you for them. To further the implementation of our reforms, an integrated planning and reporting working group and a regulations working group in partnership with WALGA and LG Pro have also been established. The feedback and recommendations of these groups have been incredibly helpful in advancing the important reforms to the sector. Today, the team from the Department of Local Government, Industry Regulation and Safety, or LGIS, will be focusing on 2 sets of regulations that will be commencing soon: the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee regulations and the Local Government Inspector regulations. These new regulations, like I've said, will commence on the 1st of January 2026, alongside the relevant provisions from the Local Government Amendment Act 2024. The Local Government Inspector regulations will operationalise the new inspector role, providing an independent mechanism to uphold integrity and accountability. The inspector will have powers to appoint monitors to assist councils experiencing governance challenges, as well as issue infringement notices for prescribed offences, improving enforcement without lengthy court processes. The Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee regulations establish ARICs as an improved oversight model for all local governments. ARICs must have an independent chair and an independent deputy to the chair. This ensures that there is an objective, qualified and independent person who is able to assist the council in its oversight of the local government administration. To assist our smaller local governments have the ability to create and share the entire Audit, Risk and Improvement Committees or the independent chair by agreement. The regulations to enable the Local Government Inspector and establish Audit, Risk and Improvement Committees will strengthen transparency, accountability and community confidence in local government. The Department will provide guidance and support to help you implement these changes. These reforms will enhance governance, improve risk management and deliver benefits for all Western Australians. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I trust this webinar will provide all the knowledge and information required to support a smooth transition into the new year. And I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks for your time and for your address to the webinar. And I just found out that there's 236 participants online, and there was a few minutes ago, so there might be even more now.
250 now.
250 and rising. So I think that's like absolutely fabulous.
I think that has to be a record, surely.
Yeah. And I think it shows such an interest from the sector in kind of engaging in these processes and being informed. So I'm absolutely thrilled, especially this time of year when everyone's so busy. Of course, I'd now like to hand over to Tony Brown, the Inspector, for his address to the webinar.
Thank you, Erin, and hello, everyone. I'd like to begin by also paying my respects to the Whadjuk Noongar elders, past and present, the custodians of the land on which I'm standing on presenting to you today. Thank you to Minister Beasley for the generous introduction. I'm really excited about this role and look forward to it. I'd also like to want to acknowledge the work and collaboration that has taken place to shape these reforms. In particular, WELGA, local government professionals, the regulations working group, and particularly the local government directorate in the Department of Local Government Industry Regulations, who have set up the office of the Inspector in a way that I really believe that will be successful. The ongoing support for these reforms from across the sector and the positive feedback we've received regarding these changes have been fantastic. This engagement and cooperation will continue to be critical as we work together towards best practice in local government in Western Australia. I'm honoured to be the first local government inspector in WA and privileged to lead this new regulatory function, supported by a dedicated team of inspectorate officers. I have 40 years of experience working for and with local governments in metropolitan and regional areas, so I have a deep knowledge of the sector, its strengths and the complex challenges it faces. I've developed policy positions on the Local Government Act and associated regulations whilst working for WELGA, so I have a good understanding of the compliance required by local governments. As Inspector, my regulatory approach will prioritise matters that pose the greatest risk to public trust, governance and integrity. This includes actively managing the risk of regulatory capture, maintaining operational independence, transparency and internal controls. The Inspector's functions are distinct from the Department. While Algiers focuses on policy and sector support, the Inspector provides independent regulatory oversight. The mandate includes education, early intervention, complaint management, formal investigation, and the application of compliance tools, including sanctions and penalties. We will monitor the conduct of local government's operations and the affairs, and our staff or an appointed monitor will educate and inform the sector to ensure compliance and good conduct. Our team will receive and deal with complaints, conduct investigations, and under the Act, I can launch an official inspector's inquiry into a local government if necessary, where significant issues are identified. The Inspector can initiate early intervention to resolve issues before escalation, receive breach complaints about council members, committee members and candidates for election, oversee general complaints about non-compliance with the Local Government Act, has the powers of a standing inquiry to investigate and intervene in any local government where potential issues are identified. I can also appoint monitors to assist local governments with any conduct and compliance issues. I have the authority to assess, triage, refer, investigate or close complaints. Also, there's the ability to order a local government to address non-compliance. And I can recommend the dismissal of a council or council member to the Minister for Local Government. Everything we do will be guided by principles of proportionality, independence, fairness and transparency. Where local governments fall short of their statutory obligations and public expectations, a swift response may be necessary. But enforcement is not our sole function. I want to really emphasise that education and engagement with all of you is absolutely critical to support continued improvements across the sector. There will be lots of opportunity for dialogue with monitors, myself and the inspectorate staff to foster compliance through understanding of everyone's regulatory obligations. I want to empower local governments to drive their own improvements. I really want local governments to be successful. You can reach out to our office for information, or when encountering compliance or governance challenges, you can request a monitor for support and possibly prevent issues from escalating further. Early intervention reduces the need for expensive and lengthy investigations and inquiries, delivering cost savings to local governments and ratepayers and limiting any possible erosion of public trust in local government or the broader sector. Many of you will hear me speak about good governance, and for me, it starts with strong, respectful working relationships, comprehensive officer reports and information, and a clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities. Elected members must steer away from operational matters, and officers must refrain from involvement in debate. This is how we achieve best practice. I look forward to working constructively with the sector to uphold good governance, build trust, and ensure the continued provision of good government for the people of Western Australia. Thank you, and I look forward to working with you over the coming years.
Thanks, Tony. Just really fantastic to have both the Minister and Tony here today to provide their presentations and thoughts and to the sector, particularly in terms of acknowledge the Minister's comments around what's been achieved and the forward-looking kind of focus as we move into 2026, and obviously Tony playing a really critical role in that. I think we're now going to spend our time focusing on the more technical kind of details of the reforms that we're here to talk about today. So Ethan Redshaw, who I'm sure everybody knows, he's the man out and about around town kind of spruiking reforms. So I'm sure he's no stranger to anyone online, and he's going to talk us through the regulatory changes and what they mean for implementation. And just a reminder, if you've got questions, just send them through on the Teams Q&A, and then we'll come to those at the end.
Thanks so much for that, Erin. I'm just fixing up my display so I can display the PowerPoint slides. So bear with me while I get the slides ready. Thanks so much for that, Erin. And I just want to also acknowledge the Minister and Tony's address. It's really a special opportunity to have a webinar with everyone. I think we have over 265 participants in the webinar right now, and just acknowledging everyone's time late in the year to go through this. So today I'll be talking through the regulations as well as resources and support, and we'll be having a Q&A session at the end as well. But before I jump into explaining the regulations and giving a bit of an overview, I'd like to do an introduction on some key aspects, just to set some context about what these changes mean in the context of the Local Government Act. So I'll start with an overview of the 2024 Amendment Act. I'll also touch on the Local Government Inspector role and the Adjudicator's role as they're set out in the Local Government Act 1995 as amended. I'll also be talking about the status of key reform projects, just as an update for the sector. I'll also touch on the Regulations Working Group and the regulations and proclamations that were made yesterday. So it's a very timely webinar. So the 2024 Amendment Act, which was passed late 2024, includes a range of reforms. These include greater role clarity for council members, CEOs, mayors and presidents. It also establishes the role of the Local Government Inspector, the roles of monitors for early intervention. It also deals with council member superannuation, increases to penalties across Local Government Act provisions. It also prescribes a rates and revenue policy that will be established through regulations. It establishes the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committees as a change from the existing audit committees. Resource sharing provisions are also scattered throughout that Amendment Act. So this includes shared CEOs, shared senior staff, as well as shared ARICs, the Audit Risk and Improvement Committees. It also included streamlining processes for making model local laws and more flexibility for regional subsidiaries. So there's quite a range of reforms that were included in that Amendment Act. Some of them have been implemented to date. So in particular, the council member superannuation reforms have been implemented. There is also implementation of the greater role clarity and the changes of those roles and responsibilities and functions. But today we're talking about the local government inspector and monitors, as well as the audit risk and improvement committees, which will be commencing on the 1st of January 2026. So the inspector will formally commence from the first date of next year, 1st of January. The inspector is an independent statutory office and it is separate, as Tony mentioned, from the local government division of Algiers. However, as a public officer, the inspector is still accountable to the Minister for Local Government, the CCC, the Public Sector Commission, the Auditor General and the Ombudsman, and also to Parliament. So an annual report is tabled in Parliament as part of that structure in the legislation. So high-level functions, which I won't go into detail of, but the inspector does have a range of powers and functions under local government legislation, primarily dealing with complaints and dealing with investigations as a function. And I give this as context to compare it to other functions that we see with other roles in this organisational overview here. So the Governor of Western Australia is responsible for appointing the local government inspector, and the local government inspector manages inspectorate officers, which are employed through the department but are separate to the management of the broader local government division. So as you see in this model here on the screen, we also have adjudicators, which are a separate arm of this compliance framework. Adjudicators are the replacement of the current local government standards panel and are a complement to the inspector's role. The inspector's functions focus on investigations and complaints. The adjudication functions are focused on penalties and sanctions. So adjudicators, which are detailed in sections 8B, 19 and 31, are outlined on this slide here. The key high-level updates is that there will be a principal adjudicator and deputy adjudicators. There can be more than one deputy adjudicator, and these individuals replace the standards panel. They must be legal practitioners with at least 5 years experience. They cannot be council members, local government employees or WALGA employees. And when a complaint alleging a conduct breach is accepted, the inspector refers the matter to the principal adjudicator, and their role is to allocate that or otherwise personally deal with the complaint as an adjudicator themselves. The process for the adjudication is to make a finding of whether a breach is found or not found. And if a breach is found, any appropriate sanction is also determined. Decisions like the current standards panel process can be appealed to the State Administrative Tribunal and reviewed at that stage. So as a quick update as well on various reform projects, you'll see here that there's the rates and revenue policy, which we're in the initial policy development phase, standardised meeting procedures, integrated planning and reporting, communication agreements, and CEO KPIs and online registers. There are other projects as well. Just acknowledging the Minister mentioned the really well-received feedback that we received from the sector for communications agreements, standardised meeting procedures, and CEO KPIs and online registers. And also just an acknowledgement of all the participation and engagement that we've received from local government professionals and WALGA as part of the IPR working group to date. That's still in the policy development phase. So I do get a lot of requests from the sector about a roadmap for these projects. We'll be looking at that in the new year once we have more clarity of the priorities. And in terms of these projects, we'll be giving more information about anticipated timing for the drafting processes, as well as making those regulations. But one key aspect I wanted to also just mention in relation to those projects is the great work of the Regulations Working Group, which has only been recently established. But I really just wanted to mention the huge amount of effort and work of those participants in that group. They do receive drafts of regulations, and they have received drafts of the regulations that we're talking about today. It is very detailed work, And we did have a delay to these making of these regulations to make sure that we could incorporate as much feedback as possible as part of that process. So I just wanted to acknowledge the standing representatives, but as well as the additional representatives that have attended those working group meetings to date. This is a standing working group and we'll be having future meetings relating to those other regulations projects. So standardised meeting procedures, for example, would be likely one of the first meetings we'll be having in the new year with that working group to progress those reforms. So the legislation has been published. So the regulations have been made as of yesterday and were published this morning. We do have a few titles here, but essentially the local government inspector regulations is a new set of regulations. So we'll call that the new inspector regulations for the purpose of this webinar. We also have what we call the inspector amendment regulations, and that's amending a whole range of different existing regulations based on the inspector's powers and different provisions in the legislation that needed to be amended to align with the Act's changes. We also have what we call the ARIC, or the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee Amendment Regulations as well. So PDF copies of those, all those sets of regulations are available on the WA legislation website. However, it's a common question that we get. The changes haven't yet been implemented in terms of the wording of the substantive regulations. So if you look at for example, the administration regulations, they will be not updated as of today with the new wording, but from 1 January 2026, they would be amended. So you can read all the changes through those amendment regulations, and the local government inspector regulations are a new set, so they're already made as of today. We also have what we call proclamations. Proclamations are when an instrument allows for the commencement of certain sections of an Amendment Act. So we do have two commencement proclamations that are key here. One of them relates to the ARIC related sections of the 2024 Amendment Act, as well as the inspector related sections of the 2024 Amendment Act. So they might be a useful reference for any officers who might want to delve into the detail of which sections have been commenced. They will list all those sections as well as the commencement date, which is going to be from 1 January 2026. Again, these are available on the WA legislation website. However, the commencement of these provisions and the amendments to the Local Government Act will go live also from that date. So diving into some of the detail, I'll start with the new inspector regulations. So as an overview of the breach system, we have here 4 main types of breaches. There is also another type of breach called a general complaint, which I won't go into detail here because the regulations don't touch on that specifically. However, the overview of the breach complaint system, in particular behavioural breaches and conduct breaches, I just wanted to get into a bit more detail today. So a behavioural breach is a complaint that needs to be dealt with at the local government level under the local government's code of conduct. And that's a change from the existing system in terms of giving that a terminology and calling it a behavioural breach. There are also other changes in terms of how that breach can be dealt with that I'll detail later on this presentation. Conduct breaches are a retitling of the existing minor breach system. So the inspector is responsible for complaint receipt and investigation in relation to conduct breaches. And the inspector does have powers to dismiss a complaint or accept a complaint, which is a change from the current system where all complaints are accepted. Accepted complaints are then referred on to the principal adjudicator for allocation and, like I mentioned before, for a finding and a sanction if appropriate to be made. Recurring breaches are when there are 2 or more previous conduct breaches. The inspector does have the discretion to treat as a conduct breach or otherwise escalate as a specified breach. And a specified breach is a change from the existing serious breach system. So in the local government amendment legislation and in the Local Government Act as amended from the 1st of January, there will be a list of specified breaches where there are particular offence provisions that will fall under that list of provisions. So again, the inspector for specified breaches is responsible for complaint receipt and investigation. They can either dismiss the complaint or accept the complaint. And if accepted, there's multiple pathways that can be pursued. So as one example, an allegation can be made to the State Administrative Tribunal about the specified breach. However, there's other pathways depending on the nature of the offence. So if it is an infringible offence, that could be referred on to an infringement notice,
Otherwise, it could be an initiation for a prosecution pathway in court. So in terms of complaints handling, the inspector may request further information from any relevant person regarding the complaint and determines the type of breach complaint that's received. Conduct breach complaints need to be made within 12 months of the alleged behaviour relating to that conduct breach, and specified breaches also have limitations in relation to that underlying statute of limitation that applies to the particular offence provision. Behavioural breach complaints are typically referred to the local government to be dealt with under its adopted code of conduct. However, the inspector may escalate the complaint if the council member has at least 2 previous behavioural breach findings. And so just to clarify as well, it's not retrospective, this provision. The behavioural breach findings will start from the 1st of January 2026. So any previous behavioural breach findings under the old system are not counted towards that count of behavioural breach findings. If it is escalated, the complaint then is treated as a conduct breach that then is referred to the adjudication process. Mediators are also dealt with in these regulations. So the principal adjudicator must maintain a panel of qualified mediators. Adjudicators can also be mediators themselves, but mediation as a process only occurs if both the complainant and the respondent agree to engage in that process. The adjudicator or inspector appoints the mediator and sets the completion timeframe, and the mediator decides the process for the mediation that's underway. So that's an optional process as part of resolving conduct breaches, to refer that to mediation if that might be a way of resolving the situation. So touching on confidentiality of complaints, Regulation 11 of the new inspector regulations lists information that must remain confidential unless an event listed has occurred. I won't read through all of this because you will provide a copy of this slide and this presentation following this webinar. But some examples are if a complaint is withdrawn, or the inspector declines to accept a complaint, or the complaint is dismissed or withdrawn under the code of conduct, or SAT does not find a specified breach. These are all instances where the complaint would be not treated confidentially any longer. As a overall change that came about through the local government legislation amendments as well, all breach findings are published, whether a breach is found or not found. And that's creating more consistency across breach findings in other states where whether or not a breach finding is found, the decision about the no finding is also published. Just some context to reading some of these provisions around confidentiality. So monitors are also a key aspect of these reforms. The inspector may appoint a monitor to a local government to support and address issues. A monitor may be appointed on request from the mayor or president, from the council through resolution themselves, or from the CEO from request. Just noting all of these are still requests. It's a decision of the inspector of whether a monitor is appointed. And regardless of the request pathway, the monitor is still a cost that's borne by the local government. And the role of a monitor is to work with the local government to build capacity, compliance with laws, implement financial controls, and facilitate resolutions for interpersonal problems, noting that various issues would be different depending on the monitor appointment situation. So some other key parts of these regulations is remuneration and expenses. So the inspector sets the monitor's remuneration, allowable expenses and payment process before appointment. And these are included in the terms of reference, the terms of appointment and paid by the local government. Additional expenses may also be approved by the inspector. Monitors cannot be inspectorate officers, council members, regional subsidiary members, local government employees, regional subsidiary employees, or peak body employees. So this includes WALGA, LG Professionals WA, and other sector representative bodies. Anyone serving on the local government's ARIC as the independent member cannot be appointed as a monitor for that particular local government. However, they can be appointed for other local governments where they do not serve on the ARIC for that particular local government. A monitor attending a meeting may adjourn it for up to 24 hours if the meeting is disorderly or for other reasons related to the monitor's appointment. So, for example, if there's an unlawful motion being considered, that might be another situation. If the adjournment pushes the meeting to the following day, there is a balance to this as well, and the monitor must notify the inspector. And this is just acknowledging that council meetings, there might be an important decision. So noting that a meeting is being pushed to the next day might be important to ensure that the meeting can proceed. So infringement notices are also dealt with in the regulations. Authorised officers have the authority to issue infringement notices for certain offences, and the inspector may appoint an inspectorate officer as an authorised officer. Prescribed offences and modified penalties are set out in Schedule 2 of those regulations, and the infringement notice form is in Schedule 3. Schedule 4 provides for the withdrawal of the infringement notice. And just noting the time frame for the issuing of an infringement notice, it can be for when the behaviour was in the last 6 months. That's the limitation period. However, once the officer forms the view that there is sufficient evidence to issue an infringement notice, the infringement notice must be issued within 21 days of that date. So that provides essentially a need to issue the infringement notice within that limited time period once that is found. There are also what we call transitional arrangements or transitional provisions. This is across the various regulations as well. So for Regulation 24, transitional regulations apply under the Schedule 9.3. There is a transitional period just to be aware of in terms of censure orders, which is Section 5.108 of the Act, and also minor breach findings register, which is 5.121 of the Act. So this is the old complaint system where there's requirements to be keeping publications of censure orders as well as minor breach findings on the local government's website. The transitional period for these old complaint system findings is the 15th of October 2027, so the next local government election, and local governments are required to publish the information until this date. The CEO is taken to be the complaints officer for the purposes of these functions in terms of maintaining this information. So as an example, if you already have a censure order published on the local government's website, that must be maintained until the 15th of October. There also may be findings from the standards panel that with any complaints that were lodged before the end of this calendar year, that would also require those minor breach findings to be updated and published. So in terms of the State Administrative Tribunal's enforcement powers, the pre-2026 suspensions and disqualifications carry into the new framework. SAT matters already underway also may continue under the old provisions with the orders treated under the new system. For confidentiality and complaints, the pre-2026 complaints keep the old confidentiality rules. So if you are dealing with complaints, the older rules with the previous local government legislation apply as at the time of that complaint. So as a summary for that set of regulations and what officers and local governments need to think about. So complaints continue under the current system until 31 December this year, with minor breach complaints still being dealt with by the standards panel. So if a complaint was lodged today, that can be lodged with the standards panel for a minor breach, and that would still be dealt with under the old system, even if the decision happens later on in 2026. However, from the 1st of January, the new complaints framework starts and complaints can be made through the inspector. Behavioural breach complaints are to be dealt with by the local government unless they are escalated through 2 previous behavioural breaches. We are also just noting that we're developing implementation guides this week to be released on the department's website. There'll be an LG alert and more information on that. So a lot of this information in this slide will also be replicated in guides, so that can be used as a reference tool. And also noting that there's the launch of the inspector's website in the new year as well. So the inspector amendment regulations is the other set of regulations that I'll talk about. The first change that I wanted to mention is closed meetings and confidential items at meetings. So this is under the administration regulations. So this is to be read alongside the sections of the Act relating to confidential items at meetings, the price or potential price for the sale or purchase of property by the local government. So this is essentially reflecting what needs to be treated confidentially. Behavioural breach complaints and related information also need to be treated confidentially, and property information for shelters for homeless persons, shelters for persons affected by family or domestic violence, and also residences for employees or officers of a local, state or Commonwealth government. So that's just a change for closed meetings to be across. There's also changes in mandatory training compliance for council member mandatory training. So the new regulation 34 A council members must repay any fees or allowances paid in advance if they are sanctioned for failing to complete mandatory training. So that's an important change to be aware of. There's also new offence provisions relating to mandatory training. Council members must declare completion of mandatory training within 1 month after the 12-month period of expiry, and that carries a $5,000 fine, and other penalties also apply, and offences for not making a declaration relating to completion of the training or for making a false declaration relating to the training being undertaken. There's also some aspects around unreasonable complaints, which was an introduced feature of the Local Government Amendment Act 2024. So the new Part 10A introduces provisions for our local government CEO can manage unreasonable complaints. So these are typically members of the public who may be repeatedly complaining about the same topic through different avenues, and they are being treated as their complaint is now unreasonable because it has already been answered, or other circumstances relating to being vexatious or frivolous or misconceived in relation to the complaint. So the regulations provide that CEO must give notice to the complainant, including previous responses by the local government, reasons why it's being treated that way, as well as information how the complainant can lodge a general complaint with the inspector regarding the CEO's decision if they choose to do so. In terms of legal expenses, the financial management regulations have also been amended. So Regulation 19 A is amended to provide that approval of the inspector is needed to write off the debt owed in relation to a repayable advance payment. New Regulation 19 D is inserted to prohibit local governments from paying directly or indirectly any council members' legal expenses for the following liabilities. So this is modified penalties for fines or offences under the Act. So as an example, an infringement notice issued must be paid personally by the local government council member, and it cannot be paid by the local government's expense. It also includes prohibition on amounts ordered by the SAT under Part 4, Division 5 of that legislation. If there have been exemplary or punitive damages awarded in civil court proceedings, they're also prohibited from being paid by local government. And an insurance premium would identify a council member against a liability of a kind referred to above. So that's just essentially providing for, if it is covered in an insurance premium, that would not allow that to be used in that instance. As an transitional arrangement, we're aware that there are currently insurance premiums that cover some of these issues. So if it's in place before the 1st of July 2026, there is that transition that it does not apply to those sorts of arrangements. But from 1 July 2026, when the new insurance premiums are changed, that will allow those provisions to be implemented as above. So there's also changes to the Code of Conduct for employees, but also for the council member code of conduct. So the employee code of conduct for local governments must require employees to disclose any secondary employment. This aligns with existing requirements under the Public Sector Management Act, and it's already a standard practice for many local governments. So it's seen as a codification of those existing policies and approaches by many local governments. In terms of the council member code of conduct, Regulation 3 A is inserted for behavioural breach complaints to be referred to the inspector if the person has 2 prior behavioural breaches. So as I mentioned before, there's also equivalent changes in the code of conduct to refer to that. Regulation 43 is amended to require a behavioural breach complaint to be dealt with under clauses 12 to 15 of the code, so providing that new terminology change. Regulation 14 A is inserted to provide the inspector with the power to appoint a monitor to assist in dealing with the complaint and direct a local government to defer dealing with the complaint until the monitor reports to the inspector on the outcome of the monitoring assignment. So it provides for the interaction between the code of conduct and the behavioural complaint system. Regulation 14 B is also inserted, and this is quite a change that's been talked about in the sector previously, and this is to allow the delegation of the council's functions under clauses 12 and 13 of the Code of Conduct by absolute majority resolution to either a council-only committee or to an external qualified impartial person. So this change really carries through some of the other more substantive changes that were in the Local Government Act to ensure that those who might be parties to a complaint, such as the complainant or the respondent, are involved in the decision-making of a council dealing with a behavioural breach complaint. Again, this allows the council to make that resolution to appoint a council on a committee or an external person to deal with those complaints, and then refer them back for addressing. Regional subsidiaries are also dealt with in these regulations. So the Amendment Act already extended the inspector's powers to regional subsidiaries, but Regulation 24 is amended to allow the inspector to conduct inquiries into regional subsidiaries in a way that informs the participants, recommend winding up if needed, and also recovering inquiry costs from the regional subsidiary or its participants. Regulation 24 A is inserted to allow the inspector to appoint a monitor to a regional subsidiary, and the participating councils must also be informed of this activity. And Regulation 24 B is inserted to extend the powers of the inspector, monitors, and the inspectorate officers to regional subsidiaries. So I describe these as consequential changes to align with the other changes in the local government amendment legislation. There's also some transitional provisions for the administration regulations in particular. So local governments must still publish those censure orders and maintain minor breach registers until the 15th of October, like I mentioned before. Council members who are elected between the 1st of July 2025 and the 31st of December 2025, so in the 2025 elections, as an example, they do have an extended time frame, and this is until the end of next year to complete mandatory training and make their declaration. So as opposed to having to complete it within 12 months from the October time frame, it's 12 months from the 1st of January, which brings us to the end of December next year. So the SAT's enforcement powers remain in place, and suspension or disqualification orders continue after the 1st of January. And then also minor breaches complaints that are lodged by the 31st of December are still handled by the Centres Panel, as I mentioned previously. So what do you need to do for the inspector amendment regulations? I recommend, since it's quite a number of changes, it's really important to read the new inspector regulations and the amendment regulations. And also I'd suggest waiting until the 1st of January to read the Local Government Act as it's amended as well. Those changes were obviously in the Local Government Amendment Bill, but that will allow you to read the provisions as they apply from the 1st of January. Reviewing policies and procedures to ensure alignment with all these regulations. So this is the administration, the audit, financial management functions in general, the Model Code of Conduct and regional subsidiary regulations have been amended. So it's also important to ensure familiarity with the closed meeting provisions and application to meetings from the 1st of January. And also all local governments will need to adopt an updated model code of conduct for council members, candidates and community members to reflect this new complaints handling system. And all local governments will need to make a new employee code of conduct to disclose secondary employment. So all of this change, noting that there is new processes for adoption of those model codes of conduct. We'll provide that information as part of an implementation guide that will be available soon on the LG's website. So the third and final set of regulations I'll talk about today is the ARIC amendment regulations. So the transition from an audit committee to ARICs. ARICs must be established within 6 months of the commencement of Part 7, Division 1, Capital A of the Act. So 6 months from the 1st of January. All local governments are required by the 30th of June to have an ARIC in place. However, there are existing audit committees that already meet the transitional requirements and then will automatically transition to an ARIC. And I'll explain a bit more about that as well. So in terms of the ARIC structure and fees, this is included in the local government legislation, not the regulations, but I thought I'd just mention it as a bit of context and reminder. The council is required to appoint at least 2 independent members. This includes the presiding member and the deputy of the presiding member, so the person who acts when the presiding member is unavailable. The council can also choose to appoint a deputy presiding member. If that member is appointed, this person must also be independent and cannot be the same person as the deputy of the presiding member. Independent members are entitled to sitting fees as determined by the Salaries and Allowances Tribunal in accordance with section 5.100 of the Act. So it's currently set by the Salaries and Allowances Tribunal at $450 per meeting. In addition to sitting fees, independent members may claim reimbursement for actual travel expenses incurred in attending ARIC meetings. So here's a bit of an overview as well, just of the membership, just to clarify that there is 2 key independent members that must be appointed, and the independent deputy presiding member is optional. There is also the opportunity for other members who may be council members to be part of the ARIC. So the functions of the ARIC regulations, as set out on the Regulation 16, is the first function area is audit, compliance and reviews. They must receive and review reports on Part 7 audits, compliance audits and Regulation 17 reviews, and they make recommendations to the council on actions to be taken. In terms of systems and procedures, the ARIC's role is to review the appropriateness and effectiveness of financial management, legislative compliance and risk management, and recommend improvements to the council. And in terms of implementation of actions, the requirements under section 7.12 capital A is to review the audit report and ensure required actions are identified and carried out, as well as a range of other implementation actions that I won't go into, but are there in the slides for reference. There's also the ability for the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee to have other functions as prescribed or provided under other written laws. So in terms of audit regulations, Regulation 14, the function area is an annual compliance audit. So local governments must complete a yearly compliance audit the 1st of January to the 31st of December for that period. And the audit covers statutory requirements prescribed in Regulation 13. So the CEO responsibilities are the CEO prepares the compliance audit return in a format approved by the inspector, and just highlighting that there is a change of this from the minister to the inspector for the responsibility for the CAR, the compliance audit return. The CEO submits the CAR to the ARIC. The ARIC reviews the CAR and reports to the council with any recommendations. And the council responsibilities are to consider the CAR and the ARIC's review, decide if any issues require action, and also that council adopts the CAR with or without amendments. The transition from the CAR to being the responsibility of the minister to the inspector is consistent with the overall compliance framework with these reforms. However, another key change is to note that the inspector has flexibility to include prescribed statutory provisions in the CAR once in every 4-year period. So that allows a more targeted risk-based approach. So for example, in the whole list of requirements, some of them would maybe only be done once in every 4-year period, and that would be compliant with the new changes to the regulations. In terms of shared ARICs, local governments may form a shared ARIC. They participate with other local governments and enter into agreement outlining decision-making, member removal, and collective exercise of powers. Employees cannot be members, but can serve on other local government shared ARICs. The presiding member, deputy presiding member, and the deputy of the presiding member must be independent and appointed by absolute majority of each participating council. All members are bound by the respective code of conduct that applies for their local government. However, for non-council members following one of the participating local government's code of conduct is required, but that would be specified in the shared ARIC agreement. Also noting that shared ARICs is one pathway to sharing the independent membership. There are other pathways as well. For example, the same independent member could be the presiding member for 2 different ARICs at the same time, and that's another way of essentially allowing for that to be shared across the sector. In terms of systems reviews, there's been some changes about the CEO must review. The old requirements included internal control and have been revised to change that to financial management. The review frequency has also been changed. So each review would need to be done in the old requirements once every 3 years. It has now been revised to once every 4 financial years. And in terms of governance alignment, this aligns with the new ARIC model with a continuous improvement focus. So as a summary of these regulations and what you need to do, it'd be recommended to review the current audit committee membership. So looking at the current membership to confirm if a local government will have an automatically deemed ARIC from 1 January, or if a new ARIC must be established. If not a deemed ARIC, it's important to establish an ARIC or a shared ARIC with the required independent members by the 30th of June 2026. It's also a reminder to review terms of reference, policies, procedures to ensure alignment with the ARIC amendment regulations. So this can be as simple as terminology, but there is also other changes for the processes, as I've outlined, that would need to be reflected throughout policies. It's also a reminder to review schedules and internal compliance calendars to make sure they align. And the compliance order return, the 2025 CAR, will be deferred to allow transition from LGs to the inspector. So the new due date of the CAR for the 2025 calendar year is the 30th of September 2026. We also will be publishing an implementation guide for ARIC that will explain more about the deemed ARICs to make sure that that's clear for the sector. So we do have a few current resources that I just wanted to mention. So we've got the Local Government Amendment Bill on the WA Parliament website. The as made section filtered by year on the WA legislation website is also a good way to find all the regulations and proclamations in the one place. I've also provided a link to the Amendment Act and the 1995 Act that will be amended from the 1st of January. And this slide, once it's emailed out, will also have links to the reform web pages, in particular the implementation web page, which will be updated from the 1st of January 2026 to align with the new legislation. In terms of current and future support materials that are being developed, so a local government alert will go out, which is normal practice when we make regulations. Web articles on inspectors and ARICs will also be published. We'll have implementation guides and fact sheets that will also reference. This webinar will be recorded and published, and copies of these slides emailed to attendees. We'd like to do that in the next day or so, just so you have this as a reference copy in the interim. And the Local Government Inspector website will also be launched in the future as well. So in terms of email contacts, the regulatory reform queries Act Reviewer LG is the best contact for us. But also we do sometimes hear that those with the independent person recruitment support, some local governments may want to talk to the department about that. And that's at the good government's email address as well. But I think that brings us to the end of the webinar content, and I might just hand over to Mike if you've got anything that's been coming through for our questions.
Yeah, quite a few questions. Some of them you've just answered around the LG alerts. So I won't reread those out because they've just been answered. So confidentiality. Do the confidentiality rules for complaints also apply to behaviour complaints?
Yes, so that detail in terms of confidentiality does apply to behaviour complaints, and that is clarified in terms of the regulations lifting confidentiality for behavioural complaints once they're dealt with in a certain way. I'll also just mention, some of these questions might be technical. We might have to take them on notice, and I really do appreciate all these questions coming in because they will also help support us answer these questions in writing as part of our implementation guides that will be coming out very shortly. So thank you for that.
Will the LG's website be updated with information on newly enacted regulations?
Yes, so there's a whole suite of information. It's quite a few sets of regulations being made on the same day. So, and they all are commencing on the 1st of January. So the information will go live on the 1st of January, and we'll provide that information as part of our LG alert. We'll also provide a bit more information as part of where you can find that information as part of our implementation guides.
There's questions about what conduct can be referred to the inspector from 1st of January, specifically under what circumstances can conduct be referred without 2 prior breaches?
So the behavioural breach system is designed as an escalation point. So if there's been 2 or more behavioural breaches that are found through the local government, they can be referred on to the inspector for a decision of whether it's escalated to be a conduct breach. However, it is an escalation system. It is very similar to the recurrent breaches for specified breaches being escalated. There needs to be previous instances where they're escalated, and then they're referred on to the inspector for that decision to be made.
The following questions relate to salaries and allowances, fees and payments. Will the Salaries and Allowances Tribunal review attendance fees for independent members, given their expanded responsibilities?
I don't want to speak on behalf of the Salaries and Allowances Tribunal, but I can confirm that we've been keeping them updated about these reforms. They are aware. I do understand they are considering the expanded scope of the regulations and the functions of the ARICs in relation to that. So, yeah, while they are an independent office, I do understand they're actively reviewing these matters.
Will there be a distinction in sitting fees between the presiding members, the deputy presiding members, and other independent members of ARIC?
That's a matter for the Salaries and Allowances Tribunal. So that's, I believe, something that has been provided in feedback, these different ways of providing for sitting fees. And that's a consideration for that tribunal.
This question relates to infringements. If a person receives an infringement, can they refer it to a magistrate's court, or does it go to?
So yeah, that's a good question. We might take that one on notice. It might just require us checking the infringement notice form to confirm that, but we can provide that one on notice.
Regarding adjudicators, will adjudicators be required to follow precedent from previous decisions?
So no, it's a new complaint system and a new framework. So in terms of precedent, there is no precedent to follow. There are what I can describe as common themes in complaints that are sometimes used. But given that it's a quasi-judicial system, it's not a court. It doesn't follow precedent in the same way, but also noting it is a new complaint system. So there's a different framework to look at. I might just circle back, thinking about it further for the infringement notice. Since infringement notices are relating to criminal offences, it would be a matter for the court rather than the state administrative tribunal. So just wanted to say that I thought about that one a bit further. I think that's the answer for that one.
So looking at the ARIC amendments, councillors need to complete the training again if they are re-elected.
They're re-elected.
Re-elected.
Look, I think that depends on the situation. It might be a good one to provide more information around, depending on the nature of the re-election, whether they've done the training in the past, as well as any exemptions that apply for them doing other training courses that kind of fill into those requirements. So it might be good if they provided that scenario to the ACT review inbox, and we can provide that in writing, but we'll also look to provide that as part of our implementation guides, more general feedback and guidance around that.
Do local governments need to update their audit and risk committee terms of reference to reflect the new improvement focus of ARIC responsibilities?
Yes, yep. So that's a necessary change. As part of amending the legislation, there's a flow and impact for policies, procedures to be looked at as well. And like I said, sometimes it's as simple as changing terminology, but with ARIC committees, there's quite a few things that would need to be looked at in the regulations to ensure alignment with your policies, terms of reference and procedures. And so while from a legal point of view, if you do already have independent persons appointed and you're compliant with those requirements, you do have a deemed ARIC, it would still be important to review your terms of reference and your policies to ensure that they do align as well.
Will local governments need to change or adopt a new model code of conduct for elected members? Should they do that now, or should they wait till the new model is issued?
So I'd recommend that happens post 1st of January 2026, when the regulation changes are amended. And yes, they are recommended to adopt a new model code of conduct so it aligns with the new systems. Yeah. There is changes for, as an example, there's no longer the complaints officer in the same way. So there's quite a few changes that just need to be reflected. And we do recommend the re-adoption of the model code of conduct post the 1st of January.
On compliance audit returns, why do they operate on a calendar year when most local government processes use the financial year?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We did have a proposal around looking at this a bit further and aligning it with the financial year as part of the regulations working group. However, we did receive quite a bit of feedback around potential issues just to do with staff capacity at certain times of the year. If the change was from a calendar year to a financial year, it also conflicts with several other operational issues that might be happening for smaller local governments in particular, trying to get those officers involved in multiple things at the same time. So we did take that feedback on board and retain the current time frame, which is on a calendar year, but there was that brought to the regulations working group, and we did get mixed feedback, but the strong preference was to retain the calendar year approach.
A couple more questions coming through. Do independent ARIC members still need to comply with the 50% meeting attendance in person for ARIC meetings? It's come from someone in the region and they're concerned about travel and accommodation costs.
Yeah, so we'll provide some information on that in writing, but what is a key change as part of the meeting procedures regulations that are being worked on is to look at those caps. So yes, they do apply. But we'll just get more information on that specific situation as they apply to that. In terms of meeting attendance, we also are looking at more flexibility for those members as part of those meeting procedures changes. So we'll look at that and I'll see if we can get some advice via an implementation guide for the ARICs, just a bit more detailed information to explain that change.
I have a question about the deputy of the presiding member and the deputy can't be the same person. So confirming that they need 3 independent members.
So you don't require 3, but if you choose to have a deputy presiding member, you will be required to have 3 independent. So the minimum is 2 independent, 1 presiding and 1 deputy of the presiding. But if there is a decision and it's a discretion to have a deputy presiding or not, then that person will also have to be independent. And yes, they can't be the same person.
There's questions about timeframes regarding for the inspector to deal with conduct complaints. Just asking if there are any timeframes around that.
So yeah, I don't know if there's more context with that, but I guess say the legislative timeframe for conduct complaints is that the alleged behaviour has to have occurred in the last 12 months. Yes. So in terms of prescribed timeframes for dealing with matters, there's no prescribed timeframes in terms of processing.
Had a flurry of questions, so I'm just scrolling through. I think we've got questions. Someone has asked, why would you choose to have a deputy presiding?
It's an option. I think it's not. We're not recommending that option, but some local governments do choose to have a deputy presiding member, and yeah, that's an option available. Yeah.
How will the cost of monitors be charged, and will this be transparent?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to answer that question. So the inspector will determine the fee for a monitor and advise the local government accordingly, as the local government will have to pay for that fee. We're currently in the process of determining that fee. So we'll determine that fee, advise the monitor and advise the local government concerned what the cost is before the monitor commences.
Is that Tony?
Some of the questions are a bit more specific, which I think will be covered with implementation guidance.
Yeah, if there's more detailed questions, then we might not get every question through the webinar, but what we might commit to is having that included as part of follow-up on the webinar, and also anything that's relevant for our materials, also including that as well. Yeah, but if there's anything else, Mike, that you have,
pretty much every question so far. Yeah, they're drawing up now.
So I think what I just want to reflect on is that there's quite a bit in that content that I just presented on with the regulations. It will take also some time for officers to get their heads around reading the provisions. I do encourage reading regulations to see the detail, and part of that process, you might have more questions, you might have something that you need to clarify with the department. We're very happy to be helping with that. We do understand that, you know, questions might not be here right now, but, you know, you're reading the provisions, you might have a question later. I'd suggest using the Act Review at lgs.wa.gov.au inbox to send that to our team, and we can respond to that in writing and get you a response. And that does help us as well, because the common queries we do then develop into broader material and guidance for the sector. But yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge all your time at very late in the year to talk through these really important changes, and also just want to acknowledge the Minister for her address, Tony for her address, and Erin introducing everyone earlier in the session. So thank you everyone for your time today, and feel free to reach out if you do want to have any other questions answered, and thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.